Xue Tao, the Wutong Tree. In front of the courtyard steps an ancient Wutong tree. Its towering trunk rises up into the clouds. Its branches welcome birds from north and south. Its leaves send off the winds that come and go. Okay, so this is a very short quatrain by Xue Tao, of whose background we already spoke of in the previous video, so you can go and listen to that if you want to know a little bit more about her. Just very succinctly, she is probably the most famous of Tang Dynasty female poets, and she basically made a living as a government sanctioned and paid entertainer in the region of Shu, so like a geisha or a hetaira of the Tang Dynasty. Now, this is a quatrain. This poem is perhaps more representative of the typical surviving female poetry from the Tang. Usually, most of the composers of Tang poems who were women were entertainers in the pleasure quarters, and they were educated in the fine arts, including that of composing poetry, but they usually composed the shorter quatrain, the four-line, in this case pentasyllabic quatrain, which is very good at just highlighting or showing one scene, one emotion, one juxtaposition. And the generally longer regulated poems are mostly exclusively done by score officials, and they tend to be more technically demanding than the quatrains. And the topic of most of these quatrains composed by entertainers, is frivolity. Is this love poems dedicated to scholar officials who are in love with them, answering the scholar official's poem and proclaiming affection, love, everlasting happiness in unity, and that kind of stuff. Now, I've chosen this poem. This poem is not completely apocryphal, but it appears in the histories that very briefly include the biography of Xue Tao. So the anecdote behind this poem is the following one. This poem would have been composed when Xue Tao was very young, 7 years old or so. And, at that time she was living with her father, who, as we mentioned, was a minor court official in Sichuan. And his father would have composed the first couplet of this quatrain and expected his daughter to complete it. So this was typical exercise. This also was typical social activity in Tang poetry contexts. Like the emperor or if among friends somebody starts a poem, in this case a quatrain, and you finish it in a satisfactory way. So the first couplet in this poem is the part composed by the father. In front of the courtyard steps an ancient Wutong tree. Its towering trunk rises up into the clouds. So as usual, this seems like a couplet that just describes a scene, not in nature, but in the courtyard. So there's a courtyard to the house where probably Xue Tao and her father are living. And there's a big tree, a Wutong tree, in the middle. So Wutong tree is a very well-known, very traditional Chinese tree, also known as the Chinese parasol tree. Quite majestic, big leaves, which appear a lot in, I think, especially in autumn poems, with the rain making a sound on top of the big, heavy, long leaves. And it's an auspicious tree associated with the phoenix. There's this idea that it's good to plant Wutong trees in courtyards because the phoenixes might nest in them, and that would give the family living around the tree good luck. But also the Wutong tree is generally associated with women, with the yin power. So whether explicitly or implicitly, this first couplet, which allegedly Xue Tao's father is producing and asking his daughter to answer, might be allegorically connected with her. He might be saying, okay, here's a poem about a Wutong tree in a courtyard, a nice tree, completed. But also, he might be saying, that's the literal meaning of the poem, but you can play on it based on the implicit meaning that the tree might be a woman, it might be you yourself. So allegedly, Xue Tao would have answered the first couplet with the second one. Its branches welcome birds from north and south. Its leaves send off the winds that come and go. So it's a good couplet that concludes the first part of the poem properly. There's this big tree. It's majestic. What does it do? Well, it's so big and majestic that birds and winds come and go and seek temporary refuge in it. So, the literal meaning is okay. Problem is with the symbolic meaning. Allegedly, after having concluded the couplet, her father was filled with sadness and anger for a long time. He was chagrined. Why would he be chagrined by this effective conclusion of the poem? Well, the idea is that the image that is being used by Xue Tao of fleeting birds and moving winds is somehow prognosticating, it's some count prophesizing her life as an entertainer, which is evidently something her father would not have liked for his daughter. So this idea of a person, this is a tree, who welcomes birds from north and south from different places, who is at the whim of these temporary birds of passage. This is definitely a future, a prognostication of a future as a courtesan, which, as I said, her father would not have enjoyed. The story is too good to be true. I mean, this is probably apocryphal. I don't know if Xue Tao did compose this quatrain, and her father the first part and she the last part. But it's a sort of anecdotal stories that would make it into the histories when talking of a famous, probably the most famous courtesan poet. So anyway, it does represent very well what we mentioned at the beginning. It captures very well, I think, the spirit of traditional, of typical Tang female poetry, of but also of overall Tang poetry, of nature on the face of it, but some underlying hidden meaning behind it, and poems of women entertainers, basically short quatrains with witty, nice topics alluding to sentimental relationships and affections.